Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to session, or rather lesson number 21. I'm clearly used to saying session because I run the Java podcast. In any case, this is lesson number 21 of the Databases in SQL video tutorial series, and this is all about selecting data into a table, which might mean nothing to you right now, but it will mean lots to you when we have completed this lesson. So, let's jump into it. So what you're going to learn today is how to insert data into a table using a select query. Okay? Again, you might not know why that's useful or why it's powerful, but it is, and I'm going to explain why that is to you. Also, you're going to learn how to use one of MySQL's string functions. We haven't really talked a lot about string functions, but I'll introduce one to you today. And you're also going to learn how to use a couple of MySQL's date functions. We're getting into a little bit of the sort of miscellaneous topics that I'm sort of littering into, weaving into the main topic. So let's get started. So inserting data. You're clearly already aware of the ability to insert data into a table. That's nothing new. We covered that way back in probably lesson 6 or 7 when we're talking about the CRUD, where we can create, read, update, and delete data. Obviously, inserting data is part of the creation mechanism of data operations. So now let's talk about a more advanced way of inserting data. Inserting data from one table into another. Okay, and obviously being able to do that in such a way that you don't have to, do it all manually and type out, like, let's say there's 1,000,000 rows in a table, you would not want to write out 1,000,000 different insert into statements. So let's look at how to write that and have that happen all in just 2 lines of code, which would be awesome. Now, this technique is useful typically when you want to recapture some data from table A into table B. A common scenario for this is to when you want to back up a table. So you back up a table using these 2 lines of code, and it just literally takes everything from one table and dumps it into another. So the common use case for that is backing up your data, your table. So let's say that we want to back up our transactions table. This is a table that you're very familiar with. How do we get the records from one table into another? Well, we can accomplish this using our insert into statement combined with a select statement. Okay, so again, you put those 2 together, and the way it works is that it's a standard select statement that you're using. So you're essentially producing a bunch of columns of data for processing, and then taking those columns of data and inserting it into the new table. Okay, but before we can actually jump into that actual nitty-gritty, that code, I want to talk about copying a table, or rather backing up a table first. Now, there's 2 steps to backing up the table. First is you need to actually create the actual table itself, the schema, the physical table in the database. Okay, and that is not part of the insert into and select combo statement that I mentioned already. This is part of another little, tricky, tweaky type code that we can use. Very simple to use. But let's create a backup table first. So let's call this transactions backup table. Okay, makes sense. You just put an underscore and backup, and there you go. That's going to be our backup table. So we can make use, like I said, of yet another handy keyword to create a copy of the table. Again, this is just a copy of the schema. This is not a copy of all the data within the table. So we're going to say create table transactions backup. Okay, so that starts just like any other creation table syntax. Okay, but instead of actually listing out all the different columns, we're just going to say like, and we're going to name another table. So we're going to say like transactions. Okay, so essentially the generic form of this is just create table, table A, like table B. Okay, simple as that. So that will create the first, like I said, the empty table, the empty schema, the skeleton, if you will. So now we've got the table created. Now we want to take the data and copy it into the new table. So now that we've created this backup table, let's do this. So we can do it via the insert into and select combo that I talked about earlier. So the actual syntax will be insert into transactions backup. Okay, because we want to insert data, obviously, into the transactions backup table. That's the whole point of this topic. Now, instead of actually, like I said, having to write out the 1,000,000 lines of code, 1,000,000 lines of scripts, SQL script code, to copy each individual transaction or each individual row if there were a million different rows in that transactions table. Instead of having to do that, we can just use this second part of the statement, which is the select statement. So we say select star from transactions. Okay, so we're obviously familiar with the just looking at select star from transactions. If you just look at that all by itself, that is nothing new. That is just a select statement where we are selecting everything from the transactions table, and essentially that would be showing it on our or within our program, whatever it is that we're using to query the database. So just select star from transactions is nothing new. But when we combine it with insert into transactions backup, there's some magic that happens here. Okay, so normally we would say insert into transactions backup, and then we would say values, right? So normally we would need to specify the values. But instead of having the values keyword, we're just going immediately into select star from transactions. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're substituting instead of values, we're putting in the select statement. Okay, and that will populate our table for us. All right, you just have to take my word for it. There's no way for me to really show you in a screenshot. I can show you the transactions table, the transactions backup table with all the data in it, but I mean that's all there is to it. It'll populate the data for you, no matter how many lines of code however many lines of or rows of data you have in there. Okay, now. Okay, fair enough. That's great. We've been able to copy a table essentially with 4 lines of code, right? Let me go back. 3 lines of code. We have our create table, table A like table B, and then we say insert into table whatever that was that I say table A, select star from table B. Okay, so there you go. That will create a direct copy. But let's get a bit more advanced. So let's talk about only inserting some of the data from the transactions table into the transactions backup table. Okay, so all the stuff that we just talked about was fairly straightforward, fairly simple. It's just a matter of syntax and remembering the syntax. Okay, now we're going to get, like I said, more advanced. Perhaps we'd like to roll up our transactions data so it's a bit more searchable. And what I mean by that is I want us to change our transaction dates so that they all fall on the same day of the month. Okay? Now think about that. Let's say you have a whole bunch of different transactions and they're all sort of scattered around, some are in August and a bunch are in every single day of August, a bunch are in every single day of September. Let's say there's like a million different rows of data, so there's a whole bunch of repeated data on repeated dates, etc., and it's sort of scattered all around. Now, if I wanted to search that data, okay, if I wanted to group all the transactions that happened in August, okay, group them all together. How would I do that? It would be a bit difficult to write a statement that would group that all together. So sometimes what people do is they create roll-up tables, which kind of work as a backup table, but they roll up the data so that it reflects something that can be grouped together, can be searched and sort of displayed as aggregate data. Okay, I actually had this. We did this in my past job when I worked for a private company in the Greater Toronto area. We had to do this. We had these roll-up tables because they got so massive. There were millions and millions of rows of data, and to search it and to group all this data together, we absolutely needed to group together the data based on what I'm going to show you how to do now. Okay, to create this roll-up table, this backup table, and roll up the data. So, in any case, like I said, this way it's easy to know which month any given transaction falls into because we've rolled it up all into one month. So, for example, if we have, August 1st, so if we have a row that is August 1st, we would roll that up and just pick a date. I mean, we could pick the first of the month, the last day of the month, but I think in the last job that I worked at, we used the middle date, so we used the 15th. Okay, so all the transactions that occurred from August 1st to August 31st would all be changed to be August 15th. Okay, so if it's August 2nd, it's going to be changed to August 15th. If it's August 30th, it's going to be changed to August 15th. And obviously, if it's August 15th, we're going to leave it as is. And the same for September, and the same for every single month of the year. All the different transaction dates get rolled up into whatever month they currently exist inside of, right? Cool. So it's all about grouping data together and easily being able to search through the data. So here's how we do that. Here's how we roll up the transaction data. Now, this statement alone looks scary. Okay, I know it looks scary, but I'm going to break it down for you. So look at what we have. We have insert into transactions backup. Okay, that's not anything special. We've seen that many times, insert into statements. Normally it has the word values after it, but as we learned in the, earlier, like 5 minutes ago, we learned that we can say insert into table A, whatever the table is, and then say select, right? So insert into select combo. So look at what we're doing. Insert into transactions backup select. Okay, so there you go. It's exactly what we're doing. We're using this new concept that we just learned. Now, in the previous example, the simpler example, I had select star from transactions. Okay, so really, if you just take out all this sort of junk in the middle, all we have here is insert into transactions backup, select star from transactions. Okay, which we're already familiar with. But obviously, it's not that simple because we want to change the actual transaction date. We want to roll up the transaction date so that if it's in September, it becomes September 15th. If it's in August, it becomes August 15th. If it's November, it becomes November 15th. So this is how we do it. We need to there's two tricky bits. We need to specify all the columns from the transaction backup table that the backup table requires and in the right order. And we need to make use of some of MySQL's string and date functions. So let me just peek ahead and see. Okay, so let's talk about what I just said, the first part where we needed to, we need to specify all the columns that table requires and in the right order. So let me go forward again. So now this is the same query. I haven't changed this query at all. Still the exact same thing. And now let's elaborate on it. So remember that the transaction backup table is a direct copy of the transactions table. A direct copy. That means it has all the columns from the transactions table are going to be inside of the transactions backup table. All the columns are still there. They're identical and they're in the exact same order. Okay? So just like any select or like any insert into statement, we need to be careful of the order that we are actually inserting our data, the order of the columns that we're specifying to have the data, being inserted into this table, right? So there's no difference. So if you go back to the insert, the CRUD lesson, like number 6 or whatever, where I'm talking about inserting data, you'll hear me talking about the order of the columns matter. So it's the exact same concept. The order of the columns still matter. Okay, but instead of saying insert into, transactions backup values and then specifying all the different values that we're inserting into, instead of saying that, now we're worried about the select part. Okay, so now the ordering of the select statement needs to be in the correct order. Okay, so see how we match up the order of the columns in the select part of the statement? Look, select transaction ID. Okay, so these rows here, this row here represents the exact order of the transactions backup table. So it's transaction ID, transaction date, amount, transaction type, and bank account ID. That is the order of the columns that exist inside the transaction backup table. Okay, so look at this order. So the first one that we need to insert needs to be the transaction ID. And what do we see here? Select transaction ID. Okay, so that matches up. Good. The second column is a transaction date. So what do we have after transaction ID? Well, we look and we have this big complicated thing that is the entire third row of this statement. Okay, we'll get into this in a second. So let's ignore this and let's assume that this represents a transaction date. Fair enough. What's the third column? Amount. What's the third column here? Amount. Fourth column, transaction type. Fourth column, transaction type. And finally, bank account ID and bank account ID. So you see that the select statement here, all of the order of the columns matches exactly what the order of the columns expects inside of the transactions backup table. Okay? So that's all I'm getting at here. That's the point I'm trying to drive home, is the order matters, and we are maintaining the order inside of the select statement. Cool. Let's move forward and talk about this crazy third line of code here. So again, I've left the actual query on the screen for you. I haven't changed anything. This is just for your reference. So like I said, the second thing we've talked about that we've done with the script is that we've massaged the transaction date. Okay, we've used a combination of two different functions. One's a string function, the other is a date function. So the first function, like I said, it's a string function, is called concat, which is short for concatenation of strings. If you come from a programming background, you probably know about concatenation of strings very, very well. If you have not come from a programming background and do not know what concatenation of strings is, here's an example. A concatenation, that's tough to say, of strings is literally just the mashing together of multiple different strings. They say strings. This is also interchangeable with the word varchar. Okay, varchar is the type of data that we use that can store alphanumeric characters. Okay, string, varchar, whichever. So what you can use is you can concatenate these together. You can mash them together like this. So this statement, concat, with a bracket and then my, comma, s, comma, ql, will result in one string, one varchar that says MySQL. Okay, and you can put as many of these strings, as many of these varchars as you want inside of this concat statement. You could have had m, comma, y, comma, s, comma, q, comma, l, comma, whatever the heck you want. You can put as many commas as you like, and it's just going to mash it all together. I think the only requirement is that you have at least two different strings, two different varchars inside of the concat statement. Because if you just had one, well, maybe that works too. I actually have never tried it, but then that would be kind of pointless, right? If you just have one string inside of the concat statement, it's just going to concatenate it with nothing, and then you're just going to result in what you started with. So that's kind of redundant. So I believe you need to put two strings, but perhaps you might only need to put one. Who knows? Depends on how MySQL implemented it. But the point is, that's what concatenation does. It mashes the strings together. So that's what we've done. We've used concat, as you can see here, and it's the bounds of it is bounded by this open bracket here and this closed bracket at the other end over here before the comma. Okay? So it's concatenating all these things together. And you look at what it's concatenating together. It's concatenating year with a hyphen, with a month, with a hyphen, with the number 15. So why the heck have we done that? Let's look a little bit further into this year and month thing that's going on. So year and month are functions that are used to extract the year and the month values from a date, from any given date. So to really illustrate this point to you, I want to switch over to my Toad environment, my Toad application, to actually show you in code how this is done. But since this video has gone on fairly long already, let's hit pause on this one. Let's split this up into two parts, and in the next part we'll actually dive into what it was that I was just talking about, which is actually seeing it in action. Sound good? Great. So I will see you guys in the next lesson. Bye for now.